That I was not expecting. Good evening, good morrow, and good day, and welcome to another edition of the Campaign Diary and Q&A for Slice and Dice, talking about the Many Lands campaign. Now, you may have just heard a little voice there.
Shameless plug!
That voice, to be precise. But the reason for that is because before we begin today, I wanted to throw in a shameless plug or a... oh, now it's not doing it. Oh, terrific. Anyway, a shameless plug. Because we've been talking about one-shots for a while in the background, about, for instance, taking a week off of our regular campaign to then do some kind of one-shot, something that'd be a bit of a divergence from the normal campaign, something interesting. Doesn't actually have to be anything related to the main campaign in the Many Lands at all. It can just be a one-shot that's just anything otherwise tabletop roleplay orientated, any kind of game at all. So we've got a few things coming up in the future. Our first one-shot will be going live. That's on Monday, the 3rd of February. That's the first Monday of February. We'll be having our very first one-shot, and for this one, we're not just going to have any old one-shot. Oh no, we're going to be having a one-shot playing as none other than Marvel and DC superheroes and other superheroes. Like, we're going to do a superhero one-shot. I won't be DMing it, so it'd be nice for me to have a week off. In fact, our very own James, who plays Seth, will be DMing. He hasn't told me that much, obviously, about what's going to be happening in this one-shot. But essentially, it's going to be a superhero team-up. So myself and the other players, some you may recognise as some of our main players from the campaign, and others you may not, as we've got some new players coming in as well, potential guests for later on in the main campaign as well, going to be coming in and playing as superheroes, and not making up new superheroes on the spot. No, these are going to be the D&D versions of Marvel, DC, of pre-existing superheroes, basically. So there'll be some faces that you'll recognise, I'm sure. And if this is the kind of thing that takes your interest, as I'm sure it is, drop us a comment with your suggestions for heroes that you'd like to see, and what kind of D&D classes / races / whatever they would be. I'd be really interested to see what you think. So drop a comment in the chat, or else contact us on social media. I'll be dropping some posts about this over the next couple of weeks just to publicise it. Very exciting indeed. Anyway, let's talk about, speaking of exciting, Monday's sessions. So this week we finally got our players to, the party finally arrived at the ball. This has been a few weeks coming now, although in game time it's been a couple of days of travel to get there. And it's session 25, which is a quarter century, so a milestone in of itself. So it was a fitting time, I think, that the crew have now arrived at the ball. And there's many things to unpack in there. There's a lot of intrigue, no combat encounters whatsoever during this week. And I, for one, actually really like weeks when there's no fighting at all. I think there's a danger, especially, I think, in a more traditional, old-school Dungeons and Dragons fashion, to put more of an emphasis on combat than on anything else. And for me, I love the roleplay side of things. You know, I'm obviously doing acting and stuff. I just love to play different characters. But I think the combat definitely has its place. It definitely makes it exciting. It's definitely part and parcel of Dungeons and Dragons. But I think it's nice to have a departure from that for a week, or even just for the majority of a session, to go through a session without having any combat encounters at all, because there's all kinds of other encounters. So in this one in particular, social encounters was important, but there can also be traps to negotiate, puzzles. We had a bit of that as well with Fleeting Look, but we'll get more onto that later on. So yeah, it's just an intriguing episode, I thought. That was just from my perspective, but also judging by some of the other landmarks, we had quite a lot of people jumping on, watching the stream, and then sticking around and watching for hours at a time. So thank you for doing that. And I take that as meaning that you enjoyed what you're seeing. So long may it continue. Fantastic. And also, this week we got our very first cheer. We got our very first bit from Drake Lazarus. Thank you very much for that. That's massive. Again, a milestone in itself. Thank you so much for that. as sort of to pay back for that, essentially, we're going to be doing another fake dice next week. Only this time, Drake Lazarus, who I'm sure will be watching, will get to roll the fake dice. So he rolls the dice, lets us know the result, then I consult the table and tell you what the outcome is. So that should be fun. Looking forward to that. So anyway, when the group arrived at the ball, I thought it was best to lay some ground rules first, to kind of remind the party, but also the viewers at home, exactly what the objective is here. Because I feel like over the few weeks of playtime, something may have got lost in the translation. So it was up to the most senior figure aboard, Gant Bron, who most of the party now despise because of his ways. I think probably more out of character than in character, or maybe just about the same. He reminded them basically they're not just looking for the wine, the tainted wine, and getting rid of it. They also are looking to find out who is behind this plot, because it may well be that they are at the ball to sort of oversee and make sure the job is done. So he did that. Whether that was taken on board remains to be seen. But so far, they haven't caused too much of a disturbance. The one sort of gaping hole they had to cover while the rest of them were at this ball was who was going to keep watch over the doppelganger who had posed as Neris, one of their party members, who's currently tied up inside a tied-up chest. And so it fell to Rexland Shortclaw, basically the only other person who's joined the party to go to Rackfell Manor, to the ball, who isn't actually a member of the party aside from Gant Bron. Obviously, Gant being a lord who he has been invited to this ball, that he is expected there. Rexland was sort of an additional person, and it's kind of fortuitous that he's there actually in hindsight. Originally, I sort of hadn't anticipated things would fall out the way they did. With first of all with them finding the statue of Lady Helene Grenfell en route, but also I hadn't really thought that far ahead as to what would happen with the doppelganger situation. Wasn't sure they would actually come out before they got to the ball, but there we are. So anyway, fortunately with Rexland being there, he could then guard the chest, and we could leave him out there, and also watching over the statue form of Lady Helene Grenfell as well. So he's sort of babysitting, if you like, leaving the rest of them to go inside. They were instructed by the elderly butler, Adams the butler, to basically on the rules of the event. So first of all, that none of the guests were allowed weapons, only the bodyguards were allowed weapons, and each guest was allowed one bodyguard and a +1, and that in of itself covered the whole party, fortunately. And Gant Bron gets a bodyguard and a cupbearer because he's one of the Lords of the Crowflies, and they're very important. So that was explained. Then the layout of the place. I've been planning this for quite some time. This ball, I thought they were going to get here much sooner, but actually that's a blessing because it means that I've had more time to sort of look over it and fine tune it. But also it means that I think the party have had more time to sort of build themselves up, and we've had some more interesting events happening on the way, which is bound to slow things down. And so I knew in my head exactly what the layout is. I have got a map drawn as well, which I think a couple of the party got to look at in the break because I left it lying around. Unfortunately, nothing too spoilery on that map anyway. Maybe one thing which I think they may have missed, but anyway. So very much aware of the layouts, and really I think as much as anything else, although it was there was a lot of emphasis on social this week, there was also a lot of in story terms a sort of establishment. There was a lot of description. I was describing the layout, describing kind of the feel of the place, the look, just really getting across that this is an affluent, this is where high society come to party, basically. So there was a lot of emphasis on that, which we haven't had for a little while. So it may have been a bit heavy on description, but I feel like it was warranted, and I think it was still painting a picture. I think it was all part of the theatre of the mind, which was the entirety of the session. Yeah, I think that went very well. There was also quite a few little tests. I think throughout this session, testing the party, see how they will react to things. And this has sort of been anticipated when I had planned out this little adventure, based on the fact that they are looking for tainted wine. One of the first things they're offered is wine, and we'll see how they react to it. And immediately, none of them were very forward about, I just want to just drink it, it'll be fine. They were just tentatively sniffing at the wine, looking at the wine, is it okay? And sure enough, every time that's happened in the session, everything was fine. Which I think actually, if anything, is putting them more on edge, because like, well, where is this tainted wine then? If everything looks fine, what's going on? Has it all been a ruse? Is there no tainted wine here at all? What's happening? That will possibly be revealed next time. We shall see. Anyway, once the description was taken care of, it was then back to meeting the various guests of the party. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of people here. I can't describe every single one, so I've just sort of noted down a few characters at this meeting, and they were significant in their own way. Interestingly, I think all but one of the characters they met weren't actually bureaucrats, senators, and councillors. Because for some reason when I was writing out, I guess you'd assume that this is the place that you'd find a lot of governors and councillors, and therefore they wouldn't really stand out. The characters that stood out to the party were more unusual. So there was the tiefling and the dwarf, who are from Isk, which is a completely separate country. It's a desert nation, kind of run by an oligarch. It's an oligarchical society, basically. And so they stuck out quite a lot, them being Wistful Gaze and Yantabal. And Wistful Gaze was a fantastic moment when that was revealed. Obviously, I had planned this because when Dan had come up with Fleeting Look as his character, using quite a strange naming device, I thought, I like that, let's use that again. And so it was a lovely little Easter egg for when they, when I think it was Malar actually started talking to the tiefling after she'd come over to the group, because he'd heard about Isk and he was from Isk himself, and so I'm going to jump in the conversation in that socially inept way that DK plays so well. And it was just very amusing to then, as he realises he's outstayed his welcome, to kind of leave it to Fleeting, that she could go, gaze, wistful gaze. It was like, yes, a perfect moment to unleash that. The timing, all about the timing on that one. So yeah, wistful gaze and fleeting look. Oh, meant to be. Anyway, there'll be more on that hopefully later on, either next week or perhaps later on in the campaign, should wistful gaze be absolutely fine and fleeting look be absolutely fine. Who knows? But if they both survive, there will be more to that, I'm sure. We also had Seth then met Gustav Rakentel, a representative from the Rumbleguts merchant family. Now, of course, although Brucon wasn't present for this, it was they knew that there was going to be somebody on behalf of the Rumbleguts at this event, and so Brucon had wanted to keep a low profile, being that he's kind of been afflicted with this family that he now doesn't want anything to do with, because he doesn't want to be part of the family business. He doesn't really kind of agree with some things that his family do. He just wants to strike out on his own and doesn't want to be attached to that name. So fortunate really that either Gustav hasn't seen him or Gustav just doesn't recognise him, doesn't know who he is. If it was a member of the Rumbleguts family, might have been a bit of a different encounter, but it did give Seth an opportunity to kind of make a friend, which is unlike Seth so far in the way that James has been playing him. But it was a nice, refreshing change that he had somebody that he didn't immediately want to kill. So instead, he used that opportunity to slag off Hero's Landing because he was bitter about the fact that the guards there had released their charge, the innkeeper Hogarth, from Oraglor, which they had taken with them. He was released apparently on Gant's orders. But anyway, so he's still a bit annoyed about that, so he's basically started a smear campaign against Hero's Landing, and it was just a really fun thing to roleplay through, and have Gustav be like, oh well, my family holidays in there, like, oh, this is so horrible to hear. That was a joy, as was unveiling Marta's new character, because obviously Marta can't play Neris at the moment because Neris has been taken by allies of the doppelganger, although we don't know who they are, and all we do know is that because of Zone of Truth, that the doppelganger will lead them to that place, but the doppelganger won't tell the party who their allies are or where Neris is, because they don't want to die. They'd rather just show them themselves. So there's that, which meant that with Marta being back now, she needed a new character. And as it happens, Marta has she's got some gigs coming up with other D&D groups in other places, and so wanted to get a little bit of practice in with playing a different character and playing a different class, and she picked a barbarian, and perfect, because that we can make that fit really easily with this ball. Sounds unlikely, I know, to have barbarians there, but the whole point is that the banquet has a centerpiece of a giant suckling boar, which originally it was just going to be a boar that had been caught, but hey, let's make it bigger, make it a giant boar. It's going to be a big party, lots of people, but also then gives that barbarian then a tie-in as to why they're there, because they were the one that slew the boar. They were employed by Lord Niccolo Belvedere, whose manor this is and whose ball this is, banquet this is. So it was nice to then bring her in that way, to bring her new character, Kajira, the half-orc from Provincia. It's kind of this kind of Russian accent going, and really no-nonsense approach. That was good fun. And again, a foil for some of the more lively, sort of aristocratic and eccentric characters. So it acts as a foil to that. That was quite fun. And also it meant that Lord Belvedere himself then could kind of introduce her to the party as a kind of talking point, really it really tied together nicely. It just seamlessly fitted into this session, I think. So a lot of conversation did happen throughout the session, and I think the main events that happened actually were caused by, well, some that you may expect and others that I certainly wouldn't have expected. One being, so obviously looking for this tainted wine, thought, where would the wine be kept? It'd probably be kept in the kitchen or in the cellar. So they immediately made a beeline. Brucon and Malar, being the two sort of older, wiser members of the party, supposedly, decided to make their way to the kitchens, see if they could find the cask of wine there, which Adams had told them about, and basically see if they could distinguish if that was the tainted wine or not. But the kitchen was off limits to everyone except waiting staff, which caused a bit of a problem. But these two, being the rational thinkers that they are, went almost completely against type. They're normally the sensible ones, Malar and Brucon. This time they were the ones with the daring plan that, and it was really a joy to see their antics. So we had Malar just striding into the kitchen, distracting everyone, like, I want to consecrate the wine, and just causing a scene and a commotion, giving the squat dwarf Brucon a chance to sneak on through using his monkey stealthy ways to get into the pantry and find the wine. So the plan worked really well right up until that point. Right up until the point that until after Brucon had got into the pantries. Once he was there, the wine is right there. It takes up the entirety of the pantry. Great idea of Brucon / Bart's to basically hack open the barrel and just the cask and just start leaking water out. Obviously, he specified that it was going to be below his head. But didn't specify being down near the bottom of the cask. So that will certainly drain some of the wine. It won't drain all of it, but it will drain it down to a certain level. So in that sense, really good thinking. But then the plan started to fall to pieces because there wasn't really an out. But I think they kind of, in some ways, despite some bad rolling, managed to luck out on that, because Malar, being the least charismatic person in the party, I think he has a -1 in his charisma checks, so he was trying to distract the waiting staff, and he rolled a 1, so we got 0, which is exceptional in of itself. So the staff was like, nope, that's it. We'll just push him out. Let's take him outside. And pushed him out the back door. But then, of course, that meant that Brucon was then trapped there on his own and with no way out without another kind of distraction. So Bart has a great idea, and this genuinely was a great idea. Tom Cruise it, jump up, because there's a wooden ceiling with beams, so try and hold his own weight sort of in the beams and do it stealthily that way, because he could hear people coming towards the pantry. As they'd heard his chopping with his kukri to try and break through the cask. So he goes to do it, rolls, gets a total of 9, I think, which is just not going to be enough for that kind of feat. Spectacularly fails and falls into the wine itself. So we now have a dwarf Way of the Drunken Master monk. So that's appropriate. Completely drenched in wine and literally swimming inside the bowl. So they just so after making a performance check and just trying to get, he convinced the waiters that he was a drunk and was released. Nice and easy. So that's kind of something that went wrong but went so right. And ended up with those two being back outside and having to make their own way back into the ball. Speaking of outside, so fleeting look, and I was aware that we'd basically been playing. I think we'd had a whole hour where Fleeting wasn't of game time, where Fleeting wasn't with the party, and so Dan had nothing to do for an hour other than watch, and he still seemed to be enjoying himself. But I obviously noticed that he hadn't done anything for a while. I thought that he needs to have his time. So, okay, while the rest of the party have been doing all the stuff that they've been doing, I asked Dan directly, so what's Fleeting doing? What did you want him to do? You can be wherever you like. And the only thing he wanted to do was go to the maze. Great. I had, the maze was another thing that I had planned out that was, had some intriguing stuff there, especially if you get to its middle. I mean, what kind of maze would it be if when you got to the middle there was nothing for you there? Be like one in real life, and that's terrible. Anyway, so I just needed to, just get over the whole maze thing there. Anyway, so Fleeting's weakness, his flaw in his stats is that he has -1 to his wisdom checks. The maze, for the most part, relies on well, there are 3 tests in the maze. The first test is simple directions, and so survival, which is a wisdom check, which he managed to roll a natural 20 on. Great stuff. Great start. So he managed to overcome the first obstacle and get quite a way into the maze. The second obstacle was getting past the purple desert flower. I think it's like the desert sleeper flower. That's what it's called. The desert sleeper flower, which is a custom monster that I had come up with myself, and obviously its abilities won't be revealed because he managed to not only identify it with a natural 20, but then also then knowing what he knew about it, that he shouldn't disturb the roots along the ground by it, decided to climb along the hedgerows and succeeded doing that as well, making it past the second challenge seamlessly, all on his own. Because there is a tendency, I think, especially with experienced Dungeons and Dragons players to never split the party, never go off on your own, not to take those kind of risks, which is sensible from a mechanical standpoint, but from a flavour, from a roleplay perspective, I feel like that doesn't really work. There are situations, like for instance, if you're going to, for the overarching plot, yes, you're going to want to go together. Like if you're going on an adventure together, you're going to go on the adventure together, like going into a cave, you'll do that together. But there's got to be times when people want to go off on their own, and particularly at this kind of social occasion. Naturally at parties people break off into groups, or go off on their own, just start wandering around, and that's totally acceptable. And I think it would be bad to discourage your players from doing that in this kind of encounter. However, had things gone terribly wrong, he would have been completely isolated, and also the rest of the group would have been unaware of where he was. So yeah, that could have gone horrifically wrong, especially with the Sleeper Flower's abilities. But anyway, fortunately that didn't happen. So we got past that, and then the final challenge was and I don't think they knew at the time that it was the final challenge, but there's a topiary Medusa. When you gaze upon it, this magical effect comes over the players. It makes them feel uneasy. It distorts their vision, which goes kind of blurry. And you have to make he had to make a wisdom saving throw, which obviously wisdom not his strong point. Anyway, he rolled and he needed to get 15, but he only got, I think, 5, something like that. It's very low. And basically, if you fail the check, you're essentially the mechanics are similar to being frightened, but you're kind of possessed almost, and you unwillingly will just walk away from. You'll walk up to the Medusa, turn left, and walk straight towards this portal. Which, when describing this to the rest of the players, they thought, "Oh God, he's going straight to this portal. He's not in control of his own body. We don't know what's on the other side of the portal. Where is this going to take him?" Fortunately, the portal only takes you back to the beginning of the maze. It's just like the quick way out. Essentially, it's like the fear effect when the Medusa goes, "Nope, not going any further in now," and you just head to the portal, and it's the quickest way to get out of the maze. So that's essentially what he did. He stepped straight out of the maze, and then you feel compelled not to return to the maze for at least an hour. So that's all we got out of Fleeting this time, was just one go at the maze. Other stuff that happened, if he had got to the middle, there's I should say, for the record, there's some really plot opening bits of there's some MacGuffins there in the center. There's some really useful information at the center of the maze, but didn't get there. Probably fortunate he didn't get there going alone anyway. But anyway, we'll see if the players decide, or should I say the characters decide, to venture out to the maze again after this. Who knows? Anyway, so other things that I think came up this time. So the players wanted to show some discretion. So they wanted to, while they were at this party, conduct their investigations without being too noticed. And I think for the most part they did quite well at this. They made general sort of conversation and alluded to stories of werewolves and things, but they were, and also mentioned that a werewolf had attacked Hilberg, which of course is a historical fact. It happened. There's no denying that. So they used that, and they were subtle, and they picked carefully who they told the real reason they were there too, only telling Kajira, being Marta's character, for as much as anything else, because actually I think they may have mentioned something to Lord Belvedere as well. Certainly I think it was more of a reference to the werewolves and the fact that there was one in Hilberg. I'm not sure whether they told him outright they thought there'd be one here. I don't think they quite got that far. But Kajira, being armed with a silvered great axe, as champions of Provincia, where she's from, get a silvered weapon as starting weapon, fortunately. Thought that'd be a useful ally to have. Other information that they found that was that could well be beneficial came from, first of all, from Howland speaking to the captain of the guards. He was appreciative of the way the place was guarded anyway. But anyway, speaking to the captain of the guards, Owen, he learned that the guards are relatively new. That the old guard had been sent to some Lord Commander in Rundar to be retrained, and he, as the captain, is the only one who's still in his post. All the rest of the guards are new. He doesn't know much about them. He doesn't know what they're like in a combat situation. He just knows that they're here and they're new, which could be interesting. And I know that Midge and the other players latched onto that, hearing that, like, they're new. What's going on here? There's something fishy, which is fair enough. Then also other information they found. Now, Malar managed to find quite a bit of information right towards the end of the session, found some useful stuff. But other players that found some goodies. Well, Brucon happened across an interesting character right towards the end of the session. So both Brucon and Malar, after their escapades out in the pantry and the kitchen, had made their way back round the manor and ended up in the ballroom on the opposite side. And had been inspecting. They've basically been looking for bottles of spirits because they've ascertained that the cask of wine seems to be fine. It doesn't seem to be poisoned. So there must be something else here. They seem to think bottles of something, because the bottles are less likely to be meddled with, I suppose. So if they were tainted, having them in the bottles, I guess, would mean that you could then be a bit more exacting with how you used it, rather than just blanket, just trying to, trying to infect everyone with lycanthropy. So as they were inspecting a couple of bottles in the ballroom, Brucon's then accosted by by a wood elf called Greta Grouse. And she mentions her husband Vikram. They've both been tearing up the dance floor, along with, of course, the band, the Merry Men of Morningill, which the group met in the previous session when they were staying in Heroes Landing. Anyway, she takes Brucon for a dance because Brucon he was drenched in wine, so he decided before going back inside he'd jump in the water feature to then wash off all of the wine, hopefully get rid of the smell as well. And then as he comes inside sopping wet, he's really only after a towel, which Greta agrees to find for him, or to give to him, if he dances with her. Which he goes, yeah, why not? I mean, there's only a 2 feet height difference, yet why not? That'll be fun. And they did, which then left Malar on his own, but not for long, because Adams the butler then found him and tapped him on his shoulder, and apparently had some urgent news. And apparently the Lord Belvedere wanted to speak to him privately about this whole werewolf business. So Malar gladly accepts, and he seemed to have a bit of an ego attack at that point, giving it the big I am, because he was he's a deacon of the 8 of the Hammerford Institute and all the rest of the spiel that he normally comes up with. And so so he heads upstairs, and before he goes into the gallery, which he's been told is on the right, there is also an open door on the left, open doorway through a little shrine area to a study. And in this study, he finds the rather stuffy and dusty room with only one occupant, that being the Lord's uncle, Rory Wimbleford. Who, full disclosure, is a little bit based off of Rowley Birkin QC from the Fast Show. If you don't know what that is, look it up on YouTube. That's Rowley Birkin QC. There's a bit of yes going on, I find that you do this kind of voice all the time. It can be quite characterful, but also it's not very practical to do that all the time. But for this character, that works. And basically, Rory Wimbleford he is quite reclusive, hence why he's up in the study and not joining the rest. He's quite old in himself, like older than even Lord Belvedere, who's supposedly in his 70s. And he whiles away his time with drinking, reading, and also practicing the arcane arts. He, by his own admission, is a bit of a novice. Basically, mechanically speaking, he knows Mage Hand, and he knows a ritual version of Unseen Servant, both of which he uses and abuses massively, basically so that he doesn't have to walk or move to get his drinks. He can just have those sent over to him by these magical forces. So that's how he uses his time. But he also had a scroll, a magical scroll, which he hadn't yet got the skill to use, but he'd examined it, and he knows that this is a knock spell from the 5th edition Player's Handbook. The knock spell basically means you can unlock any lock, any non-magical lock will be unlocked with it, but it makes a loud sort of booming sound that can be heard for quite some distance. I think it's about 300 feet is the range that can hear that boom sound. So it gives and it takes away. It's not as subtle as thieves' tools, where you can just sit there and pick at something and open it subtly. This one will make noise, so it's more for bursting stuff open. And he hinted at if you want to unlock secrets, this is what you need, because it seemed that Malar disclosed to him about some of the information about werewolves, Although Rory didn't believe him at all when Arthur, in his roundabout way, said, "What would you say if I was to tell you that we think there's a plot for werewolves to be let loose, blah blah blah?" And Rory just said, "I think you should buy me another drink." Didn't believe him at all, which was fortunate. So may have picked the right person to disclose that to. And from that he received the scroll before continuing on to the gallery. Now, although it wasn't said, suspiciously when he entered the gallery there was no Lord Belvedere there waiting for him. Most of the paintings in there had been covered up, besides one which painted. I got this right in at the end of the episode. Painted this lovely countryside scene that, as he looked at, he felt like his soul was being sort of torn from his body, being absorbed by the painting. Had to make a charisma save. What do you know? Lucked out. Rolled a natural 20 on his charisma save, meaning he was absolutely fine. No bad effects whatsoever. But that could have gone very, very badly had he failed. Again, I don't want to reveal exactly what would have happened today, because that may well be something that comes up next time. But for sure, if we get to the end of or should I say, when we get to the end of this particular quest with the party, if none of these things have happened and we're moving on, I will then reveal exactly what these things do, the things that you wouldn't have seen in the session. I think that's fair. Speaking of things that weren't seen, or at least I think should be made more of. So in the previous session, some suspicion had been cast on Lord Gant Bronn, who the company were accompanying and borrowing his carriage to get to the ball. The suspicion had been cast on him because he had supposedly gone to the stockade in Hero's Landing and demanded that they release Hogarth, who was the innkeeper of the Miners' Arms in Auraglor, whom the party had arrested essentially because of his connection to this werewolf plot. Now, Gant had worked out a deal with this Hogarth, instructing him that basically to become an informant for Gant, because I don't know if you noticed, but he's a spy master. To be his eyes, to be another agent of his, essentially, on the condition that the news about the party, about Gant and his group, would not be disclosed to any other party. It'd be like they were to any other persons. It'd be like they were never at the Miners' Arms at all. That was the arrangement that Gant made, and he wanted to be true to that. And so when the party then arrested him, it scuppered Gant's own plans as well, and so he decided to go one better, basically, and undo what they were trying to do, and he did that pretty well. But because of this, suspicion immediately was put onto Gant, and so the party discussed privately amongst themselves, not in his presence, their thoughts behind him. And some believed perhaps he was connected to this whole werewolf thing. There seemed to be a link that, or at least some causality, because Gant was in Hilberg when the werewolf struck. He's also then released Hogarth, who is somebody who is wanted in connection with the werewolf plot, as he was paid off to. He's basically paid off to pay Dean Fringe for carrying out the job, for carrying out the delivery of the wine to Rackfell Manor. So again, doesn't cast Gant in a very good light. And then finally, just his relentlessly, I say mischievous, but that's probably putting it lightly, his kind of dickery behaviour, I suppose, by whenever he gets stuck in a conversation with somebody and it's not going particularly the way he wants, or he's not getting good vibes, he just starts trying to make them fearful. And that's probably more of a meta reason by the players to not like him, because it's a feature of his Gant is taken it's taken very much from the Bard College of Whispers, so he has the ability to basically after talking to a character for over a minute, I think it is, basically to make them scared of him if they fail I think it's a wisdom save. They're frightened of him for a little while. So yeah, it is a bit of a prick thing to do, but that's what he's like. But does that make him evil? Does that make him the mastermind of this plot? Who knows? All I know is that where we've left things with the party this time, with Mallard just managing to not have an ill effect from that painting, is why was he sent up there? Why is Lord Belvedere not there? And could this be connected to what else is going on, connected to this whole werewolf fiasco? So, things to look forward to next time. I have a feeling that the party are going to be getting to the bottom of their investigations. I think that they've now got a little bit more information to go on, and hopefully they will reunite to discuss exactly what they've uncovered before the bell chimes to signal the banquet. Because at the banquet there's going to be the main event, the giant ball is going to be served up, but in addition to that there's obviously going to be more wine delivered, and at some point during this evening, if there is a werewolf plot, it's surely going to be enacted at some point in that evening, and the banquet itself, when everyone is drawn into the same room, seems like the opportune time for something like that to happen. So anyway, look forward to that. Come join me and the rest of the gang here on Monday on the channel. That's 6 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, live here on Twitch, and I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, stay safe and have a great weekend. Bye.